Qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix is over and George Russell takes pole position in a dead heat against Max Verstappen. But what did we learn? Well, in this video I am going to be doing a data analysis from qualifying. If you enjoyed the video then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top 5 teams later on, which is Aston Martin, Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull, so stick around for that. Yes, qualifying is over and both George Russell and Max Verstappen set the exact same lap time, which is something that we have not seen for pole position since 1997 at Jerez. And they managed that at a qualifying which saw an unbelievable amount of circuit evolution. Usually we see the circuit evolve from anywhere between like half a second to 1.2 seconds. However, in Montreal the evolution was absolutely incredible as the cars were constantly lapping the circuit. To show how much the circuit evolved, let's take a look at all the lap times set by George Russell from qualifying to see how much the times evolved during the session. As you can see here, the times improved by 2 seconds in qualifying, which is massive given the lap is over in 72 seconds. Let's now compare his first lap in qualifying and his fastest lap in Q3 to see how the circuit evolved and how confidence came towards the drivers. When you look at these two laps, the time really comes towards George when he's getting back onto power. Going into turn 1, Russell also brakes later, but then look at the turn 3, turn 4 chicane, and you can see that Russell is able to carry 9 km/h more minimum apex speed, and then he gets onto power much sooner. The other area where George gains a bunch of time is using the first DRS zone, as he gets great traction and he uses that to his advantage all the way down the straight, and then finally down the back straight he has a top speed which goes up by 7 km/h. Now I have a feeling that's probably because he got somewhat of a tow, but also he's probably using more deployment as well down that back straight. This really does show how big the evolution was and why it was important to be on the circuit at the right time. So we've seen how the lap times changed during the session, but now for the first time this weekend, let's take a look at the top speeds that the teams were able to reach. And what can we see when we compare these top speeds? Well, when we look at these top speeds, one thing that stands out to me is how slow McLaren were in a straight line. Recently, we have seen them improve in a straight line, but today, when Norris was setting his fastest lap, the top speed was lower than what we've seen recently. Alpine were once again a donkey in a straight line, but we've become used to that as Renault is a little bit down on power. And Haas were once again the fastest car in a straight line, and the rest of the competition was actually very similar, with a lot of the midfield teams all reaching 331 km/h. So we've seen the top speeds, but now what about the midfield and what teams were looking good? Well, once again it has to be said VCarb had a very solid day, but this time it was Daniel Ricciardo who put the lap time in and he qualified all the way up in P5, which is an incredible effort after what has been a tricky season so far for the Aussie. Let's now compare the time of Alex Albon in the Williams, who also managed to make it through to Q3, to Daniel Ricciardo. When you look at these two laps, you can see that the main edge where Ricciardo has the edge is actually on the brakes. You can see that on the delta time that when it comes to the stops, Ricciardo is just a bit later on the brakes and he gains a lot of time, showing that he has that feeling with the VCarb, which for Ricciardo is massively important. Remember, his biggest issue with McLaren when he drove for them was he couldn't get a feel on the brakes. It has taken a while, but now he looks like he might finally have overcame those issues. Both VCarbs are in the top 10, and I feel like we could very easily see both of them score points in the Grand Prix. I just want to say that if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the top 5 teams, starting with Aston Martin. For Aston Martin, in my preview and predictions video, I did say that they would get both cars into the top 10, and I also said it in my practice video that they will get both cars into the top 10, and we did see today that both Aston Martins made it into Q3, as Fernando Alonso is lining up in 6th place on the grid, and Lance Stroll managed to qualify in 9th place. Let's now compare the times of Alonso to his teammate Stroll to see how he managed to lose out against his teammates. And when you compare these two laps, it's actually not too terrible for Stroll, even though he is so far down. but he makes some critical errors. The first main error looks to be on the exit of the turn 3, turn 4 chicane, where he has a snap compared to Alonso, which is why his trace has a moment, and then he loses a couple of tenths on the exit of the tight hairpin, where we see Stroll is not able to get quite the same exit as teammate Fernando Alonso, and then finally he has a much worse run through the wall of champion chicane, which leads to a combined loss of 4 tenths in the end. In the race, if there is weather that affects the race, then I expect we should see a very strong race from Aston Martin, as Fernando Alonso has shown that he is able to fire the tyres up, which is going to be all important in slippery conditions. For Mercedes, it was pole position for George Russell as he took his first pole since 2022 at Budapest, and Mercedes this weekend finally looks like the Mercedes outfit that we have come to know since 2014, as Lewis Hamilton was also having a very solid weekend until a slightly slower final lap. Unfortunately for Lewis, the field is so tight that a couple of tenths sees him drop so far down the order. We are going to be comparing Verstappen to Russell later on, so please do stick around for that. Let's now compare the two teammates to see how Lewis lost out. When you look at these two laps, it actually looks like for the first part of the lap, Lewis actually did have the edge over teammate George Russell. The turning point in the lap really came towards the end though, through that tight hairpin. George just takes the edge over Hamilton, and then going down the back straight, George was faster, but I think this is because he had a slight toe, because he doesn't have that same edge on any other lap. Then Russell gets a much better run through the wall of champion chicane, and that secures his pole position. In the race, I'm not too sure how Mercedes will get on. So far this year, they've gone backwards during the race, so I wouldn't be surprised if Mercedes doesn't win. But if it rains and it is wet for the start, then I don't see any reason why Mercedes don't win their first race since 2022. For McLaren, qualifying was very solid and they are lining up 3rd and 4th on the grid. And if it's fully dry, then I can't help but feel that they are actually in the best position to fight Max Verstappen and not George Russell despite his pole position. Norris was only 200ths away from pole position, and Piastri wasn't much further away as he was just over 1/10 off of pole. They are definitely in a great position to close some points on their rivals Ferrari, who had a bit of a shocking day. And speaking of Ferrari, they were eliminated with both cars from Q2 as Charles Leclerc is lining up in 11th place and Carlos Sainz is 12th on the grid. All through FP3 and qualifying, it looked like Ferrari were on the back foot and seemed a little bit slow and unbalanced. And we saw that as Carlos Sainz not only had a trip through the grass, but also almost binned it at the end of Q2 trying to advance and make it into Q3. So let's compare the lap from both drivers to see what knocked them out of qualifying. And when you look at these two laps, you can actually see that Sainz has the edge over teammate Leclerc, who really looked to be struggling in qualifying. It looks as if Sainz was able to brake slightly later into a couple of chicanes and he gained less than a tenth over Leclerc, but it all came undone at the final chicane, and you can see that error through the final corner cost him 2 tenths and essentially led to a double Ferrari elimination. In the race, I expect Ferrari will be strong and they will recover nicely, and I expect one of them to finish in the top 6, but they have made their weekend very, very difficult. And finally for Red Bull, it was another very difficult day for Sergio Perez as he was eliminated from Q1 yet again, and the Grand Prix is looking like it will be a very difficult one for him to recover from. Teammate Max Verstappen once again dragged everything out of the car and came close to being on pole position, but he just missed out, even though he set the exact same time as George Russell. So how did he go about setting the same time as Russell? Well, let's compare their two laps. In the early phase, Verstappen actually opens up a decent gap to Russell, topping out at 4 tenths. But on the run down the DRS zone, you can see Russell gets a fantastic exit and uses that all the way down the straight to get back the time that he lost out. Russell then takes the lead heading into the final chicane, but as we have so often seen, Verstappen was incredible through there and clawed back the time, to the point where they actually ended on a dead heat. In the Grand Prix itself, I expect Red Bull will beat Mercedes if it is a dry race. They may, however, be vulnerable to McLaren, and if it rains, then literally anything could happen. So, what are my top 5 predictions for the Canadian Grand Prix? Well, in P5 I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, P4 will be Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, P3 will be George Russell in the Mercedes, P2 will be Lando Norris, and I think Max Verstappen will win the Canadian Grand Prix. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.